It started like any other morning in my quiet suburban neighborhood, with the faint chirping of birds outside my window and the warm golden light spilling into my kitchen. I was sipping my coffee, scrolling through emails, and planning my day when I felt a strange unease settle over me. I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just another random feeling, but deep down, I had a premonition that something bad was about to happen. I had lived in this neighborhood for years, and for most of that time, life was peaceful, even pleasant. My neighbors were cordial, the HOA mostly kept things in order, and I never imagined that someone I saw every day could harbor enough hatred to destroy my entire life. But I should have known better when it came to Karen. Karen had been a thorn in my side for years, the type of person who seemed to find joy in controlling every aspect of everyone else's life. She would patrol the streets with her clipboard, inspecting lawns, fences, and even the color of front doors, always looking for violations that didn't exist, always ready to lodge a complaint. I had tried to be polite to avoid confrontation, but she never let up. Small annoyances had escalated into outright harassment. She had called the HOA repeatedly about imaginary problems with my property, sent letters threatening fines, and even confronted me in my driveway, demanding changes I had no intention of making. I thought her behavior was extreme, but I never once imagined it would escalate to arson. That Tuesday morning, I left my home early, heading to work like usual, my mind preoccupied with the ordinary stress of my job. I locked my door behind me, never suspecting that it would be the last time I saw my house standing. A few hours later, my phone rang, and I answered to a voice trembling with panic. "Your house is on fire," my assistant shouted. I froze mid-step, unable to comprehend her words at first. "What do you mean my house is on fire?" I asked, my voice shaking. She stammered, explaining that the fire department was already on the scene, battling flames that were consuming everything I owned. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel a cold sweat breaking across my forehead as I fumbled for my keys and rushed my car. The drive was a blur. I couldn't think beyond the image of my home engulfed in smoke and fire. When I arrived, the scene was worse than anything I could have imagined. Thick, black smoke billowed into the sky, twisting and curling like angry fingers reaching for the heavens. My neighbors had gathered across the street, some standing in shock, others whispering rumors and speculation. The fire trucks hissed and groaned as hoses pumped water into the inferno, but the heat was so intense that it felt as if it were pushing back against reality itself. My house, the place I had built with my own hands, the place filled with memories and laughter, was burning. I wanted to scream, to run into the flames and save anything I could, but the firemen held me back, their stern voices cutting through my panic. And then I saw her, Karen. She stood across the street, perfectly composed, her posture rigid, as if she had come to watch a spectacle rather than a tragedy. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and I could swear I saw a hint of satisfaction, a silent acknowledgement of the chaos she had caused. I wanted to charge at her, to scream, to demand answers, but I knew it would do no good. All I could do was watch in horror as everything I loved turned to ash. The fire department worked tirelessly, but the damage was irreversible. By the time the flames were contained, my home was nothing more than a charred skeleton. Investigators arrived almost immediately, taking photographs, collecting evidence, and speaking to witnesses. Their findings confirmed my worst fears. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately set my house on fire. The thought made my stomach churn. Who could do something so cruel, so calculated? And then the pieces began to fall into place. Karen had been escalating her harassment for years. The threats, the complaints, the relentless policing of my property, it wasn't just obsession, it was a plan. And now that plan had destroyed my life. In the days that followed, I moved into temporary housing surrounded by boxes and the hollow feeling of loss. Insurance claims, fire reports, and legal consultations consumed my every waking hour. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the flames, felt the heat, and heard the crackle of wood collapsing under the fire. Every item I had treasured, the photos, the keepsakes, the furniture, the clothes, gone in an instant. My life had been reduced to nothing more than a pile of smoldering ruins. I was angry, devastated, and exhausted, but I was also determined. I refused to let Karen's actions define my future. I hired a lawyer and began to collect every shred of evidence I could find: emails, texts, witness statements, even social media posts. Each piece painted a damning picture of a woman whose obsession had turned deadly. Neighbors came to offer support, some expressing shock that such a thing could happen in their quiet community, others whispering about Karen's long history of control and intimidation. I learned that she had a reputation for escalating conflicts, for turning minor disagreements into major confrontations. But no one had expected her to take such extreme measures, to cross the line from annoyance to criminal behavior. My lawyer and I worked tirelessly, preparing for the inevitable court battle. Every detail had to be documented, every moment accounted for. I knew that if Karen thought she could intimidate me into silence, she had another thing coming. I was determined to face her in court, to tell the story of how she had destroyed my home, my security, and my peace of mind. As the day of the first hearing approached, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. Seeing her again, knowing that I would have to confront her directly, was terrifying. But it was also empowering. For the first time since the fire, I felt a glimmer of hope. Justice was within reach, and I was ready to fight for it. I reminded myself that I was not only fighting for my own closure, but for every neighbor and every person who had ever been bullied or harassed by someone like Karen. The fire had taken my home, but it had not taken my voice, my strength, or my resolve. I was ready to reclaim my life, to face Karen in the courtroom, and to make sure she was held accountable for the destruction she had caused. The day of the trial arrived, and I could feel my stomach twisting in knots as I approached the courthouse. The tall pillars and polished steps that once seemed so grand now felt imposing, almost suffocating, like the walls themselves were judging me. I kept telling myself to breathe, to stay calm, but every step toward the courtroom made my heart pound faster. Inside, the air was thick with tension. People whispered quietly among themselves, and the low murmur of conversations carried a mix of curiosity, sympathy, and judgment. And there she was, Karen, sitting confidently in the defendant's seat, perfectly composed, her fingers intertwined, her gaze forward, as if she had already won. Seeing her there made my blood boil. After everything she had done, after the fire, the loss, the fear, she had the audacity to sit in that room like she had done nothing wrong. I fought the urge to storm forward to confront her, but I knew this was not about theatrics. This was about justice. Every ounce of my focus had to remain on the facts, on the evidence, on telling the truth in a way that would leave no room for doubt. The judge entered, calling the court to order, and the room fell silent. The proceedings began with the prosecution presenting their case. They laid out every detail meticulously, starting with the history of harassment and escalating threats. They described the constant complaints to the HOA, the confrontations in my driveway, the ominous messages that had warned of consequences if I didn't comply with Karen's arbitrary rules. Each statement, each piece of evidence, painted a chilling picture of a woman whose obsession had grown from control into outright malice. Then they brought in the fire investigation report, detailing how the flames had been started deliberately. Accelerants were found, patterns traced back to the points of origin, and surveillance footage showed movement near my property the night before the fire. With each new revelation, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief that the truth was being laid bare. Dread because I knew Karen was watching, calculating, waiting for any chance to spin the story in her favor. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand, my legs trembling slightly. I took a deep breath and began recounting the events that led to the fire. I spoke of Karen's obsession with rules, her relentless complaints, and the subtle intimidation that had escalated over the years. I described the panic and devastation I felt when I received the call that my house was on fire, the helplessness of watching the flames consume everything I had worked for. I could feel the jurors' eyes on me, absorbing every detail, and I knew that this was my moment to show the human cost behind the crime. I spoke about the nights I had spent unable to sleep, the temporary housing, the insurance claims, and the overwhelming sense of violation that had taken over my life. Every word was a mixture of anger, sorrow, and determination. I wanted them to see that this was not just property damage. This was a personal attack, a calculated act of malice that had real consequences on someone's life. Karen's defense attorney attempted to cast doubt, questioning the reliability of the evidence and suggesting that someone else could have set the fire. But every attempt fell flat as the prosecution presented irrefutable proof. Emails and messages from Karen, witness testimonies, and the surveillance footage created a trail that could not be ignored. I watched as Karen's composure began to crack, subtle but noticeable, the first signs of fear in a woman who had always projected control and superiority. She fidgeted with her pen, glanced nervously at the evidence, and avoided eye contact with the jury. It was a small victory to see that the truth was beginning to weigh on her. The most intense moment came when Karen herself was called to testify. The air in the courtroom shifted. For the first time, I saw the arrogance in her eyes replaced by uncertainty. The prosecutor's questions were precise, cutting through her rehearsed statements and forcing her to confront her actions. Each question exposed her motives, her obsession with control, and the deliberate nature of the fire. I could feel the tension in the room, the collective anticipation as the jury watched the unraveling of a persona that had seemed untouchable. Karen's voice, once steady and commanding, faltered under scrutiny. The lies she had woven over the years began to unravel, revealing the coldness behind her actions. Every detail she had tried to obscure now stood exposed, leaving her vulnerable in a way I had never imagined. When the closing arguments were made, the weight of months of preparation and stress came crashing down on me. I had told my story, presented my evidence, and faced Karen in a way that demanded accountability. Now, it was up to the jury to decide. The deliberation felt endless. Minutes stretched into hours, every tick of the clock amplifying the tension. I sat in my chair, hands clenched, mind racing with thoughts of what could have been done differently, what might happen next, and whether justice would finally be served. Finally, the jury returned. The judge called the court to attention and asked for the verdict to be read. My heart raced, and I gripped the edge of the seat as the words left the judge's mouth. Karen was found guilty of arson. She was sentenced to a significant prison term and ordered to pay restitution for the damages she had caused. Relief and vindication washed over me in an overwhelming wave. Karen had tried to destroy my life, but the law had restored a measure of justice. As the courtroom emptied, I caught one last glance at Karen. She looked small, diminished, and powerless. The woman who had once ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist was now just another person facing the consequences of her choices. I felt a surge of strength, knowing that I had survived the worst and come out on the other side. The fire had taken my home, but it had not taken my resolve, my dignity, or my ability to rebuild. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't experienced since the flames first consumed my house. The path ahead would still be challenging, rebuilding a home, reclaiming my life, but I was ready. Karen's actions had been a nightmare, but they had also reminded me of something vital. Even in the face of destruction and malice, resilience, truth, and justice could prevail. I stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air, feeling the weight of fear lifted and a quiet determination settle into my bones. The road ahead was mine to walk, and I was finally free.